welcome into the Roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. And we've had the Ocean Shipping Reform Act come through, but now we may be having something else coming through as well as a bunch of other items on the maritime front that we need to get addressed. And for that, we brought in our expert team of experts to come in and talk about it. Lauren Began joins us, who is, of course, the Maritime professor out of Boston, Massachusetts, and Dr. Sal Mercogliano, assistant professor of history at Campbell University. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. Lauren, let me start with you here. We have the Ocean Shipping Reform Implementation Act now coming into Congress. This is, obviously, I think we've called this OSRA 2.0, if I'm not mistaken here. You look at this new legislation that's coming through now. What stands out in terms of what's already been passed and what's looking to be passed here by the Congress?
Yeah, that's right. So OSRA 2.0. Originally, they were kind of calling it OSRA Technical Corrections, which was really trying to kind of fix some things that they may have missed when they were doing OSRA 1.0, OSRA 2022. But now they have OSRA 2.0, this Ocean Shipping Reform Implementation Act of 2023, just released last night. The co-sponsors are Dusty Johnson and John Garamendi. They have had their hand in OSRA 2022. And they've been working on some other actually legislation proposals that have come out recently as well. So they're really diving in here. Some interesting pieces that I have kind of picked out. I really am interested about the data standards rulemaking. It directs the FMC to undertake another rulemaking. But I think that this is going to be interesting because the FMC, as we know, is already working on the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative. And now this bill is talking about data again. So I love to see it. I think that that's going to help streamline things. There's also some talk about some required minimums that service contracts that now the FMC can take a little bit more of a hand in. There's also a National Seaport Advisory Committee. Currently, we have the National Shipping Advisory Committee, which is a federal advisory committee with the Federal Maritime Commission, which is exporters and importers. Now, under Commissioner Dye's previous recommendation, they will be kind of fulfilling and rounding out the coverage of the industry involvement with a National Seaport Advisory Committee, assuming this gets passed, right? So this is all still proposal, but that'll be ports and MTOs.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting there. Sal, whenever Congress, or rather a legislative body, puts two pieces of legislation together in a very short period of time that seem to attack the same issue, either somebody's got a bone to pick or someone's got a bit on a power trip here as well. What stands out to you when you look at OSRA 2.0?
Well, I mean, this comes right on the heels of two back-to-back congressional hearings before the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And you saw Dusty Johnson and John Garamendi winding up to send this. I mean, first thing they wanted to do was get the Federal Maritime Commission, Dana Maffei, to kind of talk about what wasn't provided in the first bill. And what do you need? When Congress asks you, what do you need? And that's your opportunity. And it's very clear that FMC was kind of very lowballing it last time. I think now what you're seeing is a lot more going to be heading toward the FMC in terms of funding and resources to do things. In particularly, John Garamendi was asking about the fact of how the Federal Maritime Commission doesn't have the same enforcement elements as other commissions, such as the SEC, the FCC. And so he's trying to get that committee up to that line. And then you had a committee hearing just the other day where they brought in four presenters, one from Mediterranean shipping, one from Ports America, one from the cotton industry, and one from the Port of Long Beach. And it was night and day between those pairs talking about it. And obviously, they don't like the idea of OSRA 2.0, two of them, and that's being the shipping companies and the ports.
Yeah, so let me dive into one of those aspects that you talked about with that other hearing. Nobody likes the term antitrust, and that was one of those things that was brought up there as well. We're talking about alliances, of course, and maybe antitrust is somewhat of a term that's very strong. It doesn't necessarily go up against things like alliances, so to speak, but it does go up against things you and I have talked about, like cartels, and in terms of agreements and those natures. What do you look at when you look at this possible antitrust legislation as that was mentioned in that second hearing that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think that's the basically the third rail for the shipping companies. They are very much concerned that they're going to get labeled as cartels and that you're going to come in and do trust busting against them. Understand, you've got the split coming up here between Maersk and MSC. And when you go back and look at the history of the alliances, what you saw was creation of these alliances to counter the big alliances. And what they're saying is these vessel sharing agreements, you got to remember, benefited everybody greatly. You got really low shipping rates for 20, 30 years. And so there's a lot of incentives to do that. And there's a big trickle-down effect that could happen if you all of a sudden announce that these are cartels and you're busting them up. Talking to someone I know very well in Australia is really worried about this because they will not get the vessel sharing agreements down there that they need. Instead, what you could conceivably see is maybe just exports coming into one port. And then you have to worry about local distribution. So I think there's a lot of unintended consequences about this. And I think we're going to hear from both sides. And let me just be clear. I think the World Shipping Council has done themselves a disservice in not being more proactive in talking about what shipping did during the supply chain crisis. And if you can get Dusty Johnson, a congressman from South Dakota, to sponsor not one piece of maritime legislation, but two, that's an indication that this has gotten attention across the United States.
You beat me to it. I was going to bring that up myself there. Lauren, you were shaking your head. What in approval? What catches your eye about obviously this antitrust talk?
Yeah, well, so it's funny talking about Dusty Johnson. He's from South Dakota, right? But it's a big ag area, right? And he was just named one of the most influential ag legislators. So he does have some interest there. It was the Ocean Shipping Antitrust Enforcement Act. That's what was introduced last week. Again, Dusty Johnson, John Garamendi, but this was also Jim Costa, Josh Harder, and Jimmy Panetta. And so this had a little bit more oomph behind it. It's basically to repeal certain exemptions from antitrust laws. I think this is the wrong direction. I don't think that we should be getting rid of our antitrust exemption for these alliances for two reasons. One, they really have served new routes. They're able to kind of vessel share. I mean, that's what it is. It's a vessel sharing agreement is what an alliance is. They're sharing operational equipment, the vessels themselves, the space. They're not sharing rates. They're not allowed to share any sort of rate information. And so what we saw, like Sal was saying, we saw the benefit of lower rates, but we also saw a lot more availability to get into smaller ports, to get into not the mainline ports, because each one of the ocean carriers isn't now competing against each other one-to-one, but like two or three of them can combine together to really kind of divvy up their resources and better serve the shipping community. The other thing to really take into consideration, and I love that Sal brought this up, the international element. Just because we don't like it as the United States doesn't mean that it's not going to have a magnanimous impact on the rest of the world. If we were to do away with alliances and their formation and their ability to come service the U.S., likely we would see the dissolution of all alliances, because how can you service everywhere except for the U.S.? Would we be then encouraging basically alliances to not stop by our ports? Or on the other hand, would we be eliminating effectively, unilaterally, something that the entire global shipping community enjoys? The FMC, when alliances first came up, under Chairman Cordero at the time, he's now the executive director of Long Beach, but he was the FMC chairman. He started the Global Regulatory Maritime Summits, which was China, European Union, and the U.S. all coming together to just talk a little bit, because alliances were a global impacting new thing that was happening.
Yeah, Sal, let's move on to one of the aspects we already talked about a little bit, which is the expanded budget for the FMC in terms of possibly giving them more teeth and a little bit more power in the situation. What do you make of the new dollars that may be coming towards that commission?
I think it's really important. I mean, you heard the chairman talk about the fact that I need more, I need more analysis. I need more lawyers. I think he needs a historian, but that's just me. But I think he needs more of everything. It's been an agency that has done a great job, but their problem has been being able to get that information out. Data collection was the thing you heard him talk about all the time. And as if you listen to Dan Maffei talk, it's going to be data collection. But data collection does you no good if you can't publish it and make it available available to everybody out there. And I think that is one of the elements. I would argue that the Department of Agriculture has better access of information on global shipping in some ways than the FMC does. And that's because of the resources allocated to them. So I think that's going to be a big issue. Now, you're going to get pushback on this. We saw that in the hearing just the other day from Ports America, where FMC, for example, had a ruling against Evergreen about detention and demurrage. And there's a big pushback about this. They're not going to like the idea that there's going to be more enforcement of excessive detention and demurrage.
We've got about a minute left here. Lauren, let me just start with you real quick. Obviously, we've had a lot of legislation, a lot of ideas at least put forward, not necessarily passed as of yet, but as you look at it, in terms of what's coming, where is this all headed? What do you think?
You know, I think it really is giving the FMC the authority that they always were supposed to have, right? So they were operating at a low 30s million dollar budget. And just for perspective, I mean, when we say they need more money, we're not talking we were going to give them an extra 100 million. They typically operate with 120, 130 employees, which includes their administration and kind of the supporting areas, and also includes economists and lawyers. They're asking for 43 million. That's a line item in a lot of other or a lot of other agencies. So I think that we really are going to see the FMC be supported as much as they should be, because they help represent 90% of the world's ocean shipping, right? 90% of everything that we support or that we eat, consume, everything. 90% of the world's products go by ocean shipping.
Let me hold you there and get to Sal, because we've only got about 20 seconds left. Sal, where is this headed?
I think it's going to be a lot of debate. I think this is going to be some very contentious debate. The issue that you heard Garamendi and Johnson talk about was how the Senate cut this out of the original bill, and there's no telling what the Senate's going to do on this. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting thing to watch, of course, for the next 6 months or so. Lauren and Sal, thanks so much for joining us on this roundtable.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on with more of our show. Back over to Kaylee with our last check of headlines.